I have always admired close combat weapons such as swords, axes, daggers and so on, and so far I made a couple of them from wood. But now I want to make one from metal and try to use as many new methods of production to learn as much as I can. When you're learning something new, it is best to start small and easy, so that's why I chose to make a dagger. Now, it might feel that this one is a little bit oversized for a dagger, and that is true, but I still think of this as a dagger, because in certain video games this would be considered a regular size. This is an old piece of steel plate that I found stashed away. It is rusted and has a slight bend, but this project is more of a learning experiment, so the quality is not that important. Daggers and weapons in general are usually made from high carbon steel, because the high carbon content allows for the edge of the blade to last longer, but as a trade-off it is more brittle, so instead of bending it breaks or chips. This is most likely a mild steel with low carbon content, making it softer and bendable, and one way to tell what type of steel this is to do a spark test, to estimate the carbon content inside based on these starbursts. So frequent starbursts mean higher carbon content, and in this case there are only a few of them, so this is most likely a low carbon steel, which is not ideal or useful for weapons. But this is a learning experiment, focused more on visuals than use, so the fact that it is softer at least makes it easier to work with. This blade shape has a bunch of curves on its edges, and that is to make the shape more interesting and to learn how to grind curved bevels. This could be done entirely with a file, but the angle grinder makes this way quicker, at least for the rough grind, and the file is great for finishing the bevel to make it nice and clean. This steel plate is very porous, with some of these pores being pretty deep, but now that it's rust-free, it looks much better. I actually kinda like the texture that the pores made. They won't stand out as much, because later I'm going to try some engraving on this blade. Now it's time to make the guard and pommel for this dagger. These two parts are usually varied in size and weight in functional blades, and this one is pretty big and adds some considerable weight. However, this build focuses almost entirely on aesthetics, but this guard shape would still be able to protect, which is most important. I wanted this guard to have a golden color, because I originally wanted this to be made from brass or bronze, but I couldn't get any. So I'm making this from aluminum, which is very easy to work with, and because it's so soft, I can even use woodworking bits for shaping this. When I was designing this dagger, I had to keep reminding myself to keep it simple, since it's my first metallic weapon project. A lot of fantasy weapons have wild designs, prioritizing the rule of cool, which is obvious, because the cooler weapon does more damage. This dagger follows almost exactly my design, but originally I wanted to put something like a crystal or gem in the middle of this guard and maybe add some engraving, but that would take a while longer than this took, so I'm glad I kept it simple. I have to say that this was actually pretty fun to carve the guard and pommel out of aluminum. However, it left tiny shavings everywhere, so it makes the surrounding area quite messy. Last essential part for this dagger is the handle, which I'm making from walnut offcut. I want this handle to have a good grip and interesting shape, but not too complicated. There are different types of handle shapes that improve performance, comfort and ergonomics, depending on how the blade is used. Straight handles, such as this one, are versatile. The neutral shape works with many fighting styles and is often used with double-edged weapons. Curved handles provide comfortable grip and are typically found on single-edged blades that are great for slashing. Basically each handle type has its advantages, and for this handle I mainly went for what would be easier shape to make. As I previously mentioned, I want to try some engraving. The area of this blade is pretty large, so there is plenty of space for engraving. I decided on a simpler pattern, something that's not too difficult but still follows the design of this whole dagger. Since this blade is made of a low-carbon steel, this step most likely won't do anything regarding increasing hardness of the material, but I just want to try it as if it were a real blade. All I need to do during this step is to heat up the blade until it is non-magnetic or glowing red hot, and then immediately quench it in some canola oil. This rapid cooling increases the hardness of the steel, but it makes it very brittle, so the next step is tempering in the oven to soften the metal a little bit and ease the tension inside the material. It can happen that during quenching the blade warps, but since this is a softer type of steel, it is pretty easy to fix with the help of a blowtorch. This is called anodizing, something that I have never done before, and it works in a way that with the use of acid with current and voltage, you can create a very thin but strong layer on the outside of the aluminum part, and this layer has tiny pores that can absorb color, in this case dye, and then the color is sealed with boiling water. Sounds pretty simple, but there is a bunch of steps that are really sensitive to have a good result, such as the part has to be super clean, which can be done in multiple ways. Then the acid bath cannot exceed a specific temperature, otherwise it won't work. The next steps also need to have a specific temperature, and before and after every step the part has to be cleaned. The pommel actually turned out pretty well, but the guard did not, so I had to strip the color with sodium hydroxide for both of them, because the pommel didn't have a very deep color. Then once again sanding and cleaning, and this is actually the third attempt, where it finally worked out pretty well, when I finally knew some pretty important stuff to make sure it succeeds. This process is pretty cool, but very labor intensive, especially in a small scale setup like this, and it includes some dangerous chemicals just to get some color. On the other hand, the protective coating is very durable and it still has a true metallic surface look, which cannot be done so easily with paint. Now the whole process is almost finished. All I need to do now is to apply oil to the handle and glue everything together. This project has been a lot of fun, and I learned some new techniques that I can apply to other future projects, and overall I'm pretty happy with how this dagger turned out. In the future I would like to step this up and make other things like this, such as replicas of iconic weapons and items made from different materials to closely resemble the original. And with all of that said, let's see how this dagger looks completed.